Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the North Sydney Local Planning Panel. Before starting, might I pay our respects to the original owners of this land in which we are having our meeting today, both present, past and future. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to the panel this afternoon who will be deciding on these various matters. I'm Gary Shields. I'm the chairman of this afternoon's proceedings. My background is as a planner, an urban designer, both working as a consultant and as a local government planner. I have a PhD in planning and master's degree in urban design, traffic and planning. I have no conflicts of interest this afternoon. Jan, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Gary. Jan Morell. I am a town planner of some 40 years. My only job in retirement is to chair and sit on independent planning panels, both local and state. And with respect to my last position, I was a full-time commissioner with the Land and Environment Court for 14 years. And I do have a perceived conflict of interest with item 2, so I will step away from that and not participate in any discussions or deliberations.
Thank you, Jan. Tony. Take off mute, please, Tony.
Hello, everyone. Tony Caro. I'm a practicing architect and urban designer. Have had my own practice for 25 years. More recently, I've moved away from that and focused more on strategic advice in the area of design review and panels such as today. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. And Jane.
Hi, my name's Jane Van Hagen. I'm a registered architect. I'm the local community representative on the panel. I've lived in the Crow's Nest area for 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a few common courtesies I'd ask you to follow with in our procedures today. Firstly, please give everyone due respect who's speaking. Please do not speak while they are. No interjections or disrespectful comments. Secondly, would you please put yourself on mute when you're not addressing the panel, and wait there patiently until we get to your particular item. And lastly, can you please contain yourself to 3 minutes? And if someone has mentioned the topics that you'd like to raise previously, please don't hesitate to say, well, I agree with the previous speaker, and maybe leave it at that.
The first two items are public. I think that the first two are public items, and the rest are public items. They're close to the public.
Thank you for that. Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? So the first ones are public items, and the later items are closed to the public. So our first item
Sorry,
is...
Gary, I believe that we have 2 public items, first and second, and then the rest is closed to the public.
And I omitted to mention that I have a perceived conflict for the first item, so I shall remove myself. If someone could please contact me from the council, please, when I'm finished.
Right. So we have 2 items which are public, and the first item which I'm proposing to deal with now, and Jane has excluded itself from that particular item. We have a number of people speaking on that item, and I'm wondering if our first speaker that's identified is with us today. And the person I have listed here is Ms. Lloyd.
Mhm.
Ms.
Yes.
Lloyd, are you with
I'm
us?
here. Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Would you
Okay.
please tell the panel what you'd like to present?
Yes, I will do.
Can you start firstly by saying your name, just for the
Yes, I
record,
will.
and where you're from?
Yeah. So look, yeah, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on DA 9521, a boarding house at 313 Pacific Highway. My name is Naomi Lloyd. I'm an owner and body corporate representative of over 100 units and townhouses that are 28 West Street, which is immediately to the south of Hazelbank Laneway. I've lived in North Sydney since 1999, firstly in Ridge Street and then in the West Street complex that I represent today since its construction in 2000. I wish to speak for four main considerations. Firstly, the need for the development and the associated impacts on the community. Secondly, the flaws in the consultation process. And then third and fourth, design concerns and safety. Firstly, the development needs and the community. The current DA uses as a justification a need to provide boarding house for accommodation for essential workers at both hospitals and also for students. This clientele, we believe, doesn't exist. There are currently 5 boarding houses listed on the New South Wales Fair Trading website in North Sydney and in adjacent suburbs, and a commercial number of short stay commercial premises. The ACU, the Australian Catholic University, stated as a potential target market in the proposal, are currently offering 8 weeks free accommodation to students who take a year-long lease at their existing site. While there was always a need for social housing, the market doesn't support this development. Similarly, there are too many long vacant commercial tenancies in North Sydney and the Crow's Nest area to support a major client in the ground floor premises. I note for example, the development of 2 East Place is yet to find commercial clients several years after its construction. The social impact of the proposal is also significant. At a recent meeting with 2 local councillors to discuss this site, 14 representatives from six different existing residential tenancies attended, and of course, who representing hundreds of local residents. The immediate area, including 28 West Street, is characterised by older downsizers and younger professionals. Currently, 3 owners in our block are selling concurrently, and this is unheard of since I've been there in 2000, and is directly been attributed to their concerns over this proposal for the local area. Similarly, tenants are turning over in unusual numbers. Many of our site's apartments are impacted by visual privacy and noise concern regarding the development, both in the construction phase and as a development if it gets approved. This is increasingly a concern in the COVID-driven work from home scenario. Some of the rooms represented in the DA as bedrooms are predominantly used as offices and studies within our building. And we expect this to continue as we return to a post-COVID hybrid working models, as a lot of businesses are moving to. Secondly, this consultation. While we really appreciate the council consultation process greatly, the developers have been less transparent. The initial proposals were for a rent to build model, and limited consultations when they identified us at short notice were all related to this rent to build model, and virtually no other consultation has taken place since that time. Thirdly, the flaws in the proposed design. The current building design has a number of flaws. Firstly, the communal space allocated only partially meets the plan size requirement for the occupancy, and then only does so by putting small, virtually unusable 2-person nooks on the accommodation floor. Secondly, the floor access to the common hallway is supposed to be 8 tenancies. This has not been met, with the 12, the number on 2 of the floors. Thirdly, the blocking of the 4 adjacent windows on the recently council-approved residential development, which is called the Affinity Building. Unfortunately, the people from that Affinity Building can't be here today, but we have been in quite some dialogue with them. It does highlight a flaw in looking at proposals holistically around this very small area. The affected residences were bought in good faith with 4 windows, and it would be very inappropriate that within 2 years of that development, those windows would be permanently blocked. Fourthly, the proposed privacy louvers are a poor solution for both the visual aesthetics of the adjacent tenancies and in terms of providing light to the rooms that are already constrained by a high density development. Fifthly, the development has no sound management planning. As you are aware, a boarding house must be tied to a provider for a 10-year period. This has not been established, and as such, there is no opportunity to comment. Similarly, the building construction management plan is limited and does not adequately explain the impacts on the Hazelbank laneway. This laneway provides access for hundreds of transits daily, including students from both 6 local primary schools and secondary schools to and from and using the ovals at St Leonard's Park. Finally, safety. Council needs to consider the impacts of the development on the surrounding area. As you are aware, DA 9521 has no car parking and just cites both bike and e-bike options. Council will need to address the safety concerns of a 3rd building egress point onto a bend onto Hazelbank Landway, which restricts visual distances. Additionally, that laneway acts as quite a wind tunnel, and with substantial pot plants having been blown off from the existing 2-storey building over the last few years when it was the residents were living in there. The 4th floor balconies, therefore, to us, does present a risk overlooking the lane.
Ms. Lloyd, can you wind up there? I think you're over your 3 minutes.
They told me 3 to 5. Sorry, Gary, I'm about to finish. It'll be 1 more minute. While
Thanks
not
so much.
required, given the building height, it is recommended that the council request a formal study given the laneway's high use of community access. In summary, the rationale for this development is questionable. Developer consultation has been poor. The proposed design still has major implications, including community impacts, and there are safety concerns. Council must look beyond the proposed building and look to the nature of these developments in the context of the surrounding precinct. Just 2 paragraphs there, Gary. Should council still look to proceed with a boarding house, it is recommended that consideration be given to a smaller proposal given the impacts on neighbouring sites. The unusual shape of the site, the very small footprint, has the developer seeking to create an overly dense tenancy. One option may be to remove the 4 easternmost rooms on levels 2, 3 and 4. This would retain the existing windows for the Affinity building on the adjacent residential building of Affinity, providing building parity with the Masonic Hall next door, decrease the reliance on access to hallways, reduce impacts on Hazelbank Place, and create a more sustainable space for the longer term. So in conclusion, last paragraph, light, fresh air and ventilation. The people living in these units and the residents surrounding do deserve a better design and safety outcome. Thank you very much for your time today, committee. If you need me to send that report through, I'm happy to forward it after this meeting or at any time you desire. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. If any of the panel have any questions of any of the speakers, please don't hesitate to sing out. Ms. Butler, do we have you there?
I saw her there a minute ago, Gary. I did see Justine. I think that's her first name.
She's
maybe just on mute.
there
Yes,
she is.
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Butler, would you like to address the panel, please?
I don't have much more to say because Naomi has covered a lot of my concerns, which I share. But just to note that there are other boarding houses proposed in the area, not just this one. And what isn't clear is the plan of management. I'm aware that there are draft
Sorry, Ms. Butler, you're at 1A Eden Street, is that correct?
am.
Thank you. And your specific concerns?
The plan of management and what this and other boarding houses will actually be used for and who will manage them, other than sharing every one of Naomi's concerns. We're aware that there is draft SEP under consideration that I believe requires boarding houses to have a registered low-cost housing provider, and I'm not sure what the requirement is for these current proposals.
The draft SEP is now a gazetted document. It was gazetted on
Okay.
Friday.
So therefore, that would be the one thing I would add to Naomi's concerns.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ian Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong.
Chairman, my name is Ian Armstrong. I'm an architect and urban designer, and we are the architects who have been responsible for the design. The application's been with council, I think, now for close to a year. There has been quite extensive consultation with council officers, pre-DA, and also with the North Sydney Council Design Excellence Review Panel, which has amounted to quite extensive redesign of the original proposal. We've reviewed the council officer's report, and from a design perspective, we believe it's a fair and accurate representation of the process. If you would like us to go through any of the drawings, we're happy to do a quick review, but that's entirely up to you.
We've had a briefing prior to this meeting, and we've been through the drawings in some detail, so that won't be necessary. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong.
We're happy to answer any questions that might come up. Thank you.
You've got another 3 listed speakers. Do they all need to address this today, or do they?
I believe they're all discussing different aspects of the proposal, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the extent it's necessary, I'm a solicitor, so if I need to ask for leave to appear today, I do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Leave is given if it's needed.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Some of the panels really request that, and others not so much. But it's easy just to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Has the panel seen our letter dated yesterday, 30 November 2021? Which
yes,
I understand.
it has.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here today just to talk very briefly about the proposed condition I-14 of the proposed set of conditions, which seeks to require the entire boarding house to be used as affordable housing. In our view, that condition is onerous and should not be imposed. The condition appears to be an attempt to incorporate consistency with the recently gazetted housing SEP. However, the housing SEP does not apply to this DA as it contains a saving provision that precludes any consideration of that SEP for the purposes of this DA. The savings provision in the housing SEP is unlike previous savings positions, which required the relevant SEP to be considered as if it had been exhibited but not made. The housing SEP savings provision has different language and construction from those previous savings provisions, which has the effect of defeating any consideration of the housing SEP at all for the purposes of this DA. The housing SEP savings provision directs the provisions of the affordable housing SEP to remain applicable to this DA. So the affordable housing SEP that would be otherwise repealed on the commencement of the new housing SEP. It's all a bit of a tongue twister. So that leaves us to consider the situation under the affordable housing SEP and the North Sydney LEP with regard to this condition. Nothing in the affordable housing SEP requires this boarding house or a boarding house to be occupied only as affordable housing as proposed by condition I-14. And there's nothing in the North Sydney LEP, and in particular in the definition of boarding house in the LEP, which would require the boarding house to be occupied only as affordable housing as proposed by condition I-14. In these sort of circumstances, the New South Wales Land Environment Court has consistently held that it's inappropriate to impose a condition that constrains entire boarding house occupancy to affordable housing, such as is proposed by condition 14. For these reasons, if condition I-14, is imposed, then it would be liable to challenge as not being for a planning purpose and being unreasonable. The council report recommends approval, which is encouraging and positive. And should the panel be minded to approve the DA, then we submit that condition I-14 should not be imposed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Rodriguez, you there?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair and panel members. Apologies for the strange order that we're all speaking in today. I won't go through the details or description of the proposal. I think we're all quite familiar with it. So I might just quickly provide a summary of the need of the proposed new age boarding house. So the development will essentially provide a low cost and diverse form of housing within the North Sydney LGA, and that's to meet the needs of the local community. So there is a strong and demonstrated demand for this type of housing to accommodate key workers and young professionals in the area. As mentioned, the site is well located close to a range of public transport and key services, and that includes the Royal North Shore Hospital and Mater Hospital, which supports the proposed development for high quality, low cost housing for essential workers. It's probably worth mentioning that the site is also in close proximity to the Australian Catholic University, which currently has no purpose-built student accommodation on or in vicinity of its campus. And it's considered that the proposed development could assist with the shortfall in student housing in the area. In terms of accessibility, the site's located within 13 minutes of walking distance to North Sydney train station, 15 minutes from St Leonard's train station, and 400 metres from the planned Victoria Cross Metro station to the southeast. And as Ian, the architect, mentioned before, the proposal has been in with council for a significant amount of time. The proposal has actually undergone significant change since the pre-DA and the DA lodgement to respond to council, design review panel, Transport for New South Wales and community concerns. Concerns generally relating to bulk and scale and height, parking, amenity, heritage and impacts, heritage impacts and safety concerns with the vehicular access. So these changes essentially included the removal of the 5th level communal space and terrace, deletion of the basement level car parking in lieu of providing a basement with bicycle parking, and a reduction in the number of new age boarding rooms to 31. We've also increased the front setback in respect to the adjoining heritage item, enhanced the visual privacy measures, including the southern elevation and various other amendments. So the proposal generally complies with the relevant state and local planning provisions, including the LEP, with exception of some minor height breaches to accommodate lift overruns and services. And there's also a very minor breach of the minimum commercial GFA, or gross floor area. And they're both supported by clause 4.6 exceptions, which are supported by council. And the proposal generally complies with the key provisions of the DCP and the provisions of the relevant affordable housing SEP, with exception to parking provisions. The lack of parking on the site is considered reasonable in the site circumstances for the reasons I mentioned before. So the site is well located with regards to public transport, educational institutions and services, and obviously the site is quite constrained to being located at a very busy intersection on the Pacific Highway. So Ben mentioned the concern we had with condition I-14.
I think we've covered that one. Thanks.
Yep, so don't need to discuss that, and just really wanted to conclude by summarising that the proposed mixed-use development, which encompasses a new age boarding house, is permissible and an appropriate use in the context of the surrounding area and the merits of the proposal. It will provide a low-cost housing, which is in proximity to public transport services, employment and education. It provides an improved streetscape and public domain outcome through providing active street frontages to both the Pacific Highway and Hazelbank Place, which is a laneway. It improves vehicular and pedestrian safety at a busy intersection by removing that vehicular access and promoting a modal shift to public and active transport. And the development provides sort of various amendments and through its various amendments minimises amenity impacts to the surrounding properties.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, do you need to say anything to us?
Hi, Rob Thomas. Yeah, look, to be honest with you, I would probably be repeating some of the things that our architect and planner and lawyer have already touched on. So I was here in the capacity of taking any questions if they arose, but I don't have anything further to add to what's just been said.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your consideration there. I'll just check with the panel if they have any questions to ask any of you. Jan, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Tony? Jane? I'll take silence as in the negative.
No, sorry, no, thanks, Gary. That's Tony speaking.
And Jane, we've excused Jane, have we not? All right, that concludes this item. Can I say to the members of the public that are here that firstly, we've inspected the subject sites individually or collectively, and so we're familiar with the proposal in its context, and we've read the documentation that's been submitted by everyone, both objectors and applicants. And at the conclusion of item 2, we'll go into our in-camera session and make a determination on this matter. It'll be, the results will be posted on the website. So thank you for everyone who took in that item, and I'll move on to item 2. Thank you. Which is 21 King George Street, Lavender Bay. And I think we're losing.
And I'm excusing myself. I can be taken off. Thank you.
Thank you. And can we get Jane back, please, so that we've got a quorum? Thank you, Jane. We have a number of interested parties in respect of this application. In particular, a number of people listed to speak. The first person I have is a Mr. Hugh, if I pronounce that correctly. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Could you address the panel, please? Could you firstly say your residential address, in other words, where you reside,
Yep.
And your concerns with the proposal?
Okay.
And limit your time as best you can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dear panel chair, dear panel members, good afternoon. My name is Ken and I'm the owner of 38 Bayview Street, Lavender Bay. First things I want to address is regarding the view analysis. With all due respect, the view loss assessment is unclear and even inaccurate. As we can see, the view loss analysis was majority based on the 3D rendering that was applied to the existing pictures. In all the pictures, it does not include any heights and taken angle measurements like the street view analysis did in page 105, which make the accuracy of the 3D rendering hard to verify. To give an example, we can all look at figure 22 on page 26 of the assessment report. The teal color highlights the 21st King George Street property after the construction. And by collecting the numbers from the proposed elevation of 21 King George Street, the highest part of the wave roof is measured at 27.903 meter. And from my property section 10.7 planning certificate, our living room area ceiling level is actually measured at 27.23 meters, which means 21 King George Street roof is almost 0.6 meter higher than our living space ceiling. Realistically, from our living space, we will not only lose all the district outlook, but about 90% of the skyline. Going back to the figure 22, The rendering is at fault. Sorry, let me exit the. Going back to figure 22, the rendering is at fault and it should not be used to produce recommendations. This may also apply to all others neighbors view loss submissions and our shadow casting submissions. The rendering might be inaccurate and misleading, but without the accurate height measurement from my neighbor's blueprint or calculation, I would not emphasize or confirm the inaccurately. As I remain skeptical about shadow casting data, in the solar analysis at page 28 of the report, the lack of consideration for our daily living surprises me. Among a day for 5 hours, which is 50% of sunlight time in the winter, we receive shadow casting into our main living space, which includes our kitchen, living room, dining room, our front porch, and even our backyard. While the northeast side is the only light source among those times. With the very limited time, we could not find an architect or consultant to deliver or edit our objection. As an individual, please forgive me as I was delivering the objection in an unprofessional manner. At last, I would like to remind all panel chair and panel members, as of today, 17+7 neighbors and families' well-deserved rights and interests are on the line. We trusted you all to make the right decision, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bryant, are you there?
I am, thank you. If you don't mind, I'll also share my screen. I did include some materials for the panel to review as well ahead of the meeting. Is everyone able to see my screen? Gary, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Okay,
so my name is Daniel Bryant. I live in close proximity to the site, Unit 17, 21 Wairera Street. So I enjoy views of the harbour bridge across the rear of our site, and you can probably see an example of them behind me as the backdrop. It's not the actual view at the moment, but it is the view that we enjoy during winter when there's no trees on, there's no leaves on the trees. So I'm going to be addressing the ground levels claimed by the DA, which I believe to be exaggerated. And I think they really call into question the assertion made in the DA that the DA is compliant with the 8.5 metre building height. So if you start with figure 1 here that's on your screen now, this shows the north facade fronting King George Street. And all I've done in this diagram is mark with the red line here the height control line that the applicant is relying on to say that they are compliant with the building height. What they don't include is the ground line that they're relying on to determine the height control line, and you can see that in the next slide here. I've drawn this on by subtracting 8.5 metres from the height control line, and you can see it marked here going up the site. Now, if we imprint this line, the ground line, on the existing site, what we can see here is that the applicant is relying on what I think are quite clearly built structures to define their ground line. So the top right, we can see the applicant is relying on the roof of an existing garage that they actually propose to demolish as part of the DA. And down to the left, we can see that the applicant is relying on a wall. Now this wall is it's a sandstone wall. It forms the foundations of the existing house on the site, and it essentially allows it to be held up in this elevated position. This wall is not a retaining wall. The DA includes an engineering report. That engineering report says that this wall is not capable of actually retaining earth. It's not strong enough. Its only role is to physically hold the building up. And actually contained within this wall is a basement today. So how this could constitute ground level is just not well understood to me. If we move on to the next example, so figure 4, we can see another example of the DA relying on the wall as the ground level. So down here, we can see that the ground level is claimed to go over the building wall here, and you can see the corresponding increase in the height control line here. So again, they're relying on what is a wall to be their ground level, and that is then claimed to benefit in terms of how tall they can build up. I would also refer the panel to figure 5. This was attached to the planner's report, and this is the contour map of North Sydney from 2013. Again, as we cross the site here on King George Street, you can see there's commonality of the contour lines starting in King George Street and going through the site. There's nothing here to indicate the kind of 2 metre high differences in height that are being claimed by the applicant. They're very clearly very level through the site at the same level as King George Street. And finally, I'd ask the panel to consider the historical photos here of the site. This is what the site looked like here in 1905 to 1910, and again here in 1920. This is what the site did look like. And then again, there's nothing here that would correlate with these kind of elevations that the applicant is trying to benefit from at the front of the site. So I think until the applicant is able to kind of demonstrate a more supportable ground level from which they're claiming their heights, that I think the panel really needs to be refusing the application and insisting on the applicant providing a proper ground level from which they're measuring their 8.5 metre building height. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Bright. I've got, I think, Mr. and Mrs. Hull listed as the next speakers. Are you both proposing to address?
We're addressing different topics. Yes, Mr. Chair, Anne will speak first. Then I'm hoping that Mr. Bryant, the other one, Craig Bryant, would address you next, followed by me, if that suits you, please.
Could you give me your residential address, please, Mr. Hull,
Yeah,
where you reside?
My residential address is 28 Walker Street, Lavender Bay, and I'm the owner of Unit 1421 Wawira Street, Lavender Bay, which is immediately above the unit owned by the previous speaker and Craig Bryant.
Thank you. Would you proceed, please? And would you be as brief as possible? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, were you content with the order that I asked for? Namely, my wife goes next, then Craig Bryant, and then me.
If on the basis that you'll be as brief as possible, yes, that's acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Dear committee, my name is Anne Hull and I represent the units of 21 Wawira Street and an apartment 14. I'm going to be addressing the catastrophic impact of this DA on harbour views for both local community and us personally at 21 Wawira Street. From the community perspective, the Heritage Offer raised concerns regarding view loss from King George Street footpath, and I don't think these concerns have been adequately addressed. The view analysis provided by the applicant, which is shown in figure 1, suggests that only the upper arch of the bridge is visible today, which will be obstructed by the DA. This is a misrepresentation in my opinion. As shown in figure 2, it is quite clear that much of the harbour bridge is visible. And I saw, as I walked today, at least 6 sails of the Opera House. It is very concerning that the applicant's expert has underplayed the view from King George Street, and this has not been explicitly referred to by the independent planner. Regarding my personal situation, I believe the harbour views have been downplayed. While it is true and noted in the planner's report that during some of the months the view is filtered, during the winter months these views are unfiltered and spectacular. Figures 5 and 7 are examples of this, whereas the planner has only included the filtered summer views in her report, which in my opinion is very unfair. If you refer to figures 6 and 8, this shows that my apartment loses its iconic Opera House view entirely from the only living space, much of the deck of the bridge also lost. And apartment 17 below is a dramatic reduction in the extent of the Harbour Bridge arch visible, while unit 10 loses the land to water interface. All of these are highly valued according to the Tennessee principles. It is therefore difficult to comprehend how the council report has concluded that, and I quote, the proposal does not result in the material loss of views from any adjoining developments. I would argue that this is very material for me and for others from both a daily enjoyment of having spectacular iconic views, which attracted most of us to these properties originally, and also from the estimates that I'm receiving from real estate agents that the iconic view loss or obstruction of my view will result in a devastating decrease in the value of my property. If this is not a material loss, I don't know what is. Figure 4 shows how marginal this view will be, whereas the red dotted line marks the benefit of a compliant setback DA, allowing me to regain a full view of the Opera House from my balcony. Although the design incorporates glass balustrades, this really isn't quite good enough when they can be obstructed by both people and furniture, particularly at special times of the year, namely New Year's Eve, when my view loss will be very obvious. I find it perplexing that North Sydney planner would recommend approving a development that fails on so many grounds to meet the DCP. It has a non-compliant setback on a prominent corner block for which views of the surrounding community are so significantly affected. If this design goes through, the applicant will be taking these views and will be enjoying them from her very large balcony, her living room and her master bedroom. My small unit, on the other hand, will only be able to see a tiny part of the Opera House from the very edge of my tiny balcony, lost from my lounge dining area totally. Her property is inadequately set back from the road, incorporates a flat roof and builds to the high control line right across her boundary. This is not reasonable and should be reconsidered. All I'm asking for is that for the council to require a compliant design that adequately view shares rather than view takes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. We have Mr. Bryant, do we? Mr. Craig Bryant. You're on mute there.
Right.
You are on mute, sir. You'll need to come off mute if you want us to hear you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was just struggling to get off mute.
I thought you were practicing there.
No, I'm sorry, I haven't had a lot of practice. My name's Craig Bryant. My residential address is at Coal Point on Lake Macquarie, but I'm a co-owner of Unit 17 of 21 Waiwera Street, which is adjacent to the site. I would also like to screen share some material which hopefully will help the panel to understand my discussions, if that's okay.
Thank you.
The proposed development is inconsistent with the North Sydney DCP in a number of ways, and I'd like to focus on 3 today. The DCP says that consent must not be granted for the development of a house that proposes parking in the basement. An exemption is available if there is no alternative location on the site for required parking, but clearly that's not the case here. There is currently a 2-car garage servicing the site accessible from King George Street. The AK planning report states that if the garage is retained in King George Street, the site would not be able to comply with either site cover or landscape area provisions. This statement isn't supported by any analysis and seems highly improbable. While it may well be that this development could not comply, that doesn't mean that no development could comply. While other houses in Bayview Street have basement garages, they meet the exemption. There is nowhere else for them to park. The basement parking leads to the second non-compliance I'd like to address. The DCP says that the finished floor height of the ground floor level should be no higher than 1 metre above the ground level existing. The AK planning report states that the proposed house has a finished ground floor level of 900 millimetres to 1.4 metres above the existing ground level. There's no explanation as to how these figures were derived, and they seem improbable. While there is differences of opinion regarding the ground level existing of the site, even if we use the developer's ground level, the distance between the finished floor level up here and the ground level would appear to be at least 2.6 metres. Retaining the garage in its current location would enable the house to be set lower into the site, reducing the bulk and scale concerns, enable a more conventional pitched roof, and reduce the impact on views to surrounding public and private spaces. Note that there are very few windows at the ground floor level, so the impact on the development should be minimal. Finally, the DCP says that the front setback of a property must match that of adjoining properties or the average of those properties. The AK planning report calculates the average setback at 4.15 metres, but it must be noted that the setback of the adjoining properties are all at around 4 metres. The minimum proposed setback to Bayview Street is only 2.1 metres. That's at the corner of King George Street. The DCP says that the principal objectives are firstly to reinforce the characteristic pattern of setbacks. Allowing a 2.1 metre setback when all neighbouring properties are set back 4 metres clearly breaches this objective. The second objective is to control the bulk and scale of buildings. Under the current design, the development will rise more than 9 metres above the pedestrian pavement at the corner of King George and Bayview Streets and be located only 2 metres from the boundary. No justification is given in the report as to why the development should be entitled to encroach 2 metres beyond the uniform setback of adjacent properties. This is particularly relevant given the bulk and scale of the development at the corner of King George and Bayview Streets and the significant impact of views to neighbouring public and private spaces. I urge the Council to ensure that the controls in the DCP are adhered to ensure appropriate development of the site and appropriate view sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hull.
Thank you. I also have, sorry, Craig, can you just take your screen sharing off?
I'm doing my best. I apologise.
Thank you.
What have I done?
Got them anyway.
I don't know. Oh, there we go. Good, thank you. So I'd like to share some pictures from my screen. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The AK planning report relies on section 1.4.10, provision 1, to support the proposed wave roof form for reasons that we dispute. The stated objective of the section is to ensure the provision of a characteristic roof typology through the use of similar forms, shapes, and materials. Provision 1 provides that buildings should incorporate a pitched roof, except where another roof form is identified in an area character statement for the neighbourhood or as being compatible with the characteristic roof form for the neighbourhood. The AK planning report relies on the fact that the subject area character statement does not identify a characteristic roof topography. However, provision 2 reiterates that roofs should, if not identified in the relevant area character statement, as here, then they should positively relate to neighbouring buildings. Provision 3 states that roofs should be pitched generally between 25 to 36 degrees and preferably within the lower end of this range at an angle of 27 to 28 degrees. Provision 4 allows a roof pitch less than 25 degrees to maintain views, and I stress that, to maintain views or to correspond with a particular building design. Figures 3, 4, and 5 of what I'm showing you here, 3 and 4 show a pitched roof, and you can see that on either side of the height of the pitch, you retain a significant part of the harbour bridge. But if you impose a flat roof across the whole thing, you remove a lot of it. That is not, of course, taken from the site. It's just to demonstrate the point. Figure 5 shows a pitched roof with a 28 degree pitched roof. Once again, I can't show it from the angle that I need to, but you get the point. The surrounding area is characterised by a mixture of roof forms. See figure 6. Those marked with green are pitched roof. Those marked with red are flat roof, and the subject property is yellow. The dominant characteristic roof form for the immediate and surrounding neighbourhood is pitched roofs. Those properties in figure 6, incorporating a flat roof, do not occupy a prominent quarter block, are set significantly back from the boundary, are not visible from and do not border a heritage conservation area, shown in figure 7, and they do not interfere with public domain and private iconic views, as demonstrated by previous speakers. This DA seeks to benefit from the setbacks of the Victorian and Georgian housing of King George Street to create a building on the boundary of a prominent corner block that does not positively relate to neighbouring buildings and is not compatible with the characteristic roof form or the heritage neighbourhood. I'll go back to figures 1 and 2. If I can do that. There's the typical setback of the roofs in King George Street compared with figure 2 with the proposed development. And might I add, the figures that one sees there, whilst they're standing on the pavement, if you were to move them a couple of steps into the building, they would obviously, according to this DA, be subterranean figures, not figures walking on existing ground. The proposed building obstructs iconic Harbour Bridge and Opera House views from both the public domain, as my wife pointed out in figures 1 and 2, and surrounding properties, and grossly exaggerates existing ground levels, as the first speaker mentioned, to squeeze as much accommodation as possible between its prohibited basement, as Craig pointed out, is prohibited basement car parking and its non-complying, non-characteristic roof. Given the significant and numerous departures of the proposed development from council development controls, I submit that the developer should be required to revisit the proposed design with the objective of first complying with the development control plan and secondly, maintain as much as possible the existing iconic views. Thank you very much, Chairman and panel.
Thank you, Mr. Hull. We've got a few speakers for the applicant. We have firstly the planner, we have the architect, and I'm just wondering if they could specifically address some of the issues that have been raised by the objectives as part of their submission, please. So could I call on Ms. Coombs, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ashley Coombs. I work for Guide Consulting and we were the planners on this project. And I'm also joined at this meeting by Stephen Isaacs from Architecture Saville Isaacs, and they were the architect on this project. We do have a few concerns of our own in relation to some of the recommended conditions, but I will go through and respond to the issues raised by the adjoining landowners and residents first. I guess in relation to the roof form, it's evident in the council assessment report there are different types of roof form in this area. Obviously, the heritage areas are dominated by pitched roofs. We are not in a heritage conservation area, and the dwellings on Bayview Street all fall outside that area. There's also other examples along Bayview Street of some roofs that have curved elements within them, and for that reason, we think that the roof form is acceptable. In terms of the views and the setbacks, we have, as part of the assessment process, reduced the height of the overall development by 600 millimetres, notwithstanding one of the conditions of the consent with those design amendments through the assessment process. We have also shortened the vertical blades on the first floor terrace to help reduce impacts on views. In terms of the basement garage within Bayview Street, the predominant built form, and even along King George Street as well, is that there's basement garages which sit upon, which a two-story development sits upon. And in that respect, the proposed development is very consistent with the other built form along Bayview Street, which is the context of which the site is mainly seen. Chair, I may pass to the architect if they want to respond to any of the specifics regarding the questions on the accuracy of the plans, but I do know that, as I said, there are some concerns in relation to the conditions that I wanted to raise. I just didn't know which order you wanted to do that in.
I'd like you to finish what you've got to say.
Okay.
And in particular, I'd like someone to address the ground line and the height, which seems to be the critical issue.
Okay, well,
Are you deferring to the architect?
Yeah, for that one, I'm Stephen, if that's okay with you. Oh, Stephen, you're on mute.
Sorry, Ms. Coombs, have you finished now?
No, okay. Sorry, Chair. So basically, we have reviewed the recommendation of the planner, and we support that recommendation for approval. We just do have some concerns relating to the conditions, some of the conditions that have been imposed. One of those conditions is just in relation to the list of approved plans. I noted that there's a few errors in terms of revision numbers and dates, and we would request that those plans be updated if the panel was of a mind to approve the development. Also, condition C6 relates to structural adequacy of adjoining properties. We assume that this condition relates specifically to the development immediately adjoining the site, so 19 King George Street and 38 Bayview Street. At the moment, that's not specified within that condition, and it seems as if that may have been the intention. So if that could be clarified as part of any approval, that would also be considered. We would like that. The final thing, is just in condition C6, and this is, C1, this is the design amendment that council's requesting to help reduce the view impact. We would suggest to the panel for the following reasons that these conditions be deleted if the panel was of the mind to approve the development. That said, if council was of a mind to impose such conditions, we note in particular to what I'll call condition C11, there is a pole and a down pipe at the corner of the balcony that can't be moved, and we would request then that condition specifically relate to the privacy screens above the balustrade, and that the down pipe be retained, and the pipe that provides a structural support to the terrace. The reasons why we would suggest that the those conditions be deleted is because in imposing them, it makes the usability of our first floor terrace unusable for not particularly much more view than what's already there. We are compliant with the height, the 8.5 metre height limit. We're actually 8.4 metres, and the wave roof has actually allowed us to retain even more views rather than if we did a flat roof. In relation to the balustrades, which I think are recommended to be glass, and also the reduction of the barbecue, they don't impact on the views of the Harbour Bridge or the Opera House. The sails of the Opera House and the the arch of the bridge are what make those two landmarks iconic, and those features of the balcony do not in any way impact on views from 21 Warrior Street to those landmarks, and in that respect we would request that those conditions be deleted. I just would like to finish by saying yeah, the usability of that space is particularly important to the future resident of this building. We are an east-west orientated site, and we, to make the most of the views available from that orientation, we have proposed to put the terrace on the eastern side. It's been designed as the main entertaining area for that reason and is located off the living area.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Coombs. Mr. Isaacs.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and panel. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'll just start by just responding to the issues raised regarding questioning the accuracy of our documentation and height control plan and levels. We stand by the information in our drawings. With regard to number 38, where there was questions raised about the levels of their ground floor relative to the existing roof, I'm not sure what information they are basing their levels on, but a professional survey was undertaken of the property and the adjacent buildings, establishing the relative levels of floor levels of the neighbouring buildings, existing structures on our site, and that's what's reflected on the drawings. With regards to the height control line, so we did extensive investigation along with a surveyor of the site to establish where the existing ground level is throughout the site. And as part of the submission there was, so what we did as part of the process is we modeled in 3D the existing ground throughout the site, and the site, it varies dramatically through the site. They're different areas. It should be noted that there is some subfloor basement space, as correctly pointed out, that has a little window to Bayview Street, but that does not extend all the way to the corner, and our modelling and our height plans do reflect that. So that's why on different drawings there's different, depending where a section is cut or an elevation, the ground line will reflect the condition at that point.
Mr. Isaacs, can I just pause you there? That
yes.
Ground line that Mr. Bryant showed you say would be incorrect or not an interpretation as you understand it.
I'm saying what is shown on our drawings is correct. So on the elevation that Mr. Bryant referenced, there is on our drawings a red dashed line that represents the ground line. And remembering that when you're looking at the height control line reflects the height control and the ground line at the elevation. It doesn't reflect the ground line on the pavement or at the boundary. So each elevation one reflects, because what's relevant is the height of the building at the elevation.
And at the particular point that it's measured.
At a particular point. And as part of our submission, we included a three-dimensional height plane projection, which projected the existing ground form 8.5 meters into the sky in 3 dimensions, then included the form of the proposed building to be able to check for ourselves and show that every point within our proposed building is less than 8.5 meters above the ground, directly below that point of the building, which is my understanding of how one measures height, and I believe is consistent with recent court cases that there have been around the matter. So we stand by our ground plane and our height control. Then as part of the extensive interactive process with council and the planners, the building has been amended dramatically. The building has been lowered to sit fully within the height plane. This has compromised the views that are accessible to our client, because remembering our client's property has to look over all the properties on the low side of Bayview Street to try and gain a fair share of the view, which I believe is the intention. Now, in terms of addressing bulk and scale, I think what really needs, the minute you look at any of the drawings or you visit the site, what's very apparent is that it's an unusual site, it's a challenged site. It's at the moment there is just a bit, the low building on the site, which means that everybody's used to having this corner site that's effectively undeveloped, that everybody has had the benefit of being able to look over. If you look at the adjacent buildings on both sides, you'll see that both of those buildings are substantial buildings that are 2-story plus pitched roof houses sitting on top of a full story of stone base or garaging. So those immediately adjacent buildings, are a good 3.5 stories in height, significantly higher than 8.5 meters. So we believe that our proposed form, which sits a good story lower than both of those neighbouring buildings, is an effective and appropriate outcome for the site. The site, is challenging in terms of design, but we worked hard to try to achieve a balance between respecting neighbours, making sure that there's solar access maintained to number 38, which, if you look at the shadow diagrams, provides plenty of sun in midwinter to those properties. Number 38 Bayview Street obviously does have some outlook towards North Sydney, but its primary outlook is unobstructed views of the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge, which I think should be borne in mind. In terms of view impact, we've done extensive view analysis, we've done extra view analysis, we've taken, when the residents in 21 Wairera submitted photos from their properties, we've modeled those and done view analysis of those properties as well. The only reason that those properties weren't included in the initial view analysis was that when both ourselves and the view analysis consultant visited the site, and started this process a good year or more ago, when one looked back at the surrounding properties, the trees were in full leaf, and it was not obvious that there were views from properties so far away behind substantial trees. So, once that was brought to our attention, we went through the process of providing those view analyses, which I think show with the reduced height that those properties in 21 Wairera still do maintain, yes, there is some compromise to views, but, unfortunately, any development on that site, any reasonably expected development, which I'm sure anyone who would have bought those properties would have considered, okay, is there likely to be future development of the site? There would be some impact, but I believe that those impacts have been kept to a minimum. There are still, iconic views from those properties, which is clear in the view analyses. I also don't think that in terms of the proposed condition, I don't think that if part of that is that the balustrade to King George Street should be glass. I don't believe that would provide any significant benefit to any of the neighbours, but it would have a severe detriment to the amenity of our applicants' outdoor space, in that they'll be totally exposed to everybody, to people in the street. So the reason for that solid balustrade and the horizontal sort of blade is to provide some level of privacy from when people are looking up from the street, that horizontal element stops people looking straight into the property or at what's going on the balcony. And being a horizontal plane, it doesn't affect horizontal views from a similar
Okay.
level. So we would respectfully request that that proposed condition is amended to enable the balustrade on that side to remain as a solid balustrade.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacs. Anything else?
If I've missed anything, please let me know.
Any questions from the panel?
No, thanks, Gary.
Jane,
Yes, could I ask a question, please?
please.
Given that this is a brand new building on a blank site, essentially, apart from the sandstone wall, why does the building not comply with the setback from Bayview Street?
Thank you for your question. We don't agree with the assessment of, in terms of the conclusion that it doesn't. Our understanding is that the setback should align with the adjacent neighbours, or if there isn't a consistent alignment, then be the average of the neighbours. And when one looks at King George Street, the neighbouring property, the three following neighbouring properties all have the same alignment to Bayview Street. So we took that same straight alignment and projected it across to this property. What happens along Bayview Street is that the boundary actually the boundary angles, which means that the setback is not a consistent dimension, all the way along the site. It's closer on the one corner and further away on the other corner. But if you look all the way down Bayview Street, the actual facades are all square, not angled, and they generally align with each other. This was the same approach we took at the other end of Bayview Street, number 2 and number 6, which we did a few years ago, which once again, follows the alignment of the neighbours, and rather than being curved or angled to follow the street. So we believe it is consistent with the context.
Thank you. Any other questions? Peter,